Psalm chapter number 93 tonight, please. I've been announcing all week that I would be dealing with a subject that has long haunted the United States as well as other parts of the world. I announced that I would be preaching on the subject of voices from within the Titanic. While you're turning to that passage, I would like to say thank you for coming. Is the group that's been driving in from Kentucky every night, are you here? Where are you all? Psalm chapter number 93 tonight, please. I've been announcing all week that I would be dealing with a subject that has long haunted the United States as well as other parts of the world. I announced that I would be preaching on the subject of voices from within the Titanic. While you're turning to that passage, I would like to say thank you for coming. Is the group that's been driving in from Kentucky every night, are you here? Where are you all at from Kentucky? Who's been driving in from Kentucky? Raise your hand. Is it about a 4-hour trip? Is that correct? Okay, 2.5 hours away. I knew there was a group here on yesterday that drove 4 hours to be in this meeting. And then we have a gentleman here from West Virginia that drove 5 hours to be here tonight. And we're just so honored to have you from all over the country here visiting with us this evening. I appreciate what the Lord's done in the meeting. The people that have been saved, always good to hear the Henson family sing for us again tonight. I love Brother Roger Henson and his dear family. All the choirs, Brother David, your youth department did a wonderful job. The piano player's son was saved going home last night. Is that correct, Brother David? He got saved going home last night. And I'm glad God is still troubling the waters and helping people. I'm glad Anna's back tonight. She got saved. I'm so proud of you being here. Miss Pam was the first one that got saved during our meeting. She got saved the first night. Stand up, Miss Pam. We're so proud of you. And then, other than the night she's working, she's been here every night. Thank you. I tell you what she told me. You read about it in the paper. Is that correct, Pam? Listen to this. She got under conviction before the meeting ever started. She said, I read about it in the paper. And when I read about the meeting in the newspaper, I'm not even in the state of Tennessee. And she got under conviction about this meeting. It's a lot bigger than the preacher when God sends revival. It's a lot bigger than the church. It's the Holy Ghost breathing on people and bringing them in from everywhere. And I want to take a moment to give God the glory for everything He's done. Psalm chapter number 93 and verse number 3. The psalmist said, the floods have lifted up, O Lord. The floods have lifted up their voice. The floods lift up their waves. The psalmist tells us that it is possible for the floodwaters of this world to lift up their voice. And I told you that I was going to deal with the subject of voices from within the Titanic. It just marked a few days ago, 98 years ago, that the Titanic went down. Almost 100 years. But it's still one of the greatest phenomena that the world has ever known. Pigeon Forge has just built a whole site that is dedicated to the history of this great ship called the Titanic. This boat made its maiden voyage. It launched out on April 10th of 1912. It left from Southampton, England. It was a first-class ocean liner made by the White Star Line, and it was funded by Mr. J.P. Morgan himself, a citizen of the United States. He was to be on the Titanic in its maiden voyage, but circumstances would not allow him to do so. But when she loaded up the ship and the cargo and pulled out, headed for the open Atlantic Ocean, there were 2,228 people on that first-class ocean liner, the largest ship the world had ever known. There was 331 people in the first class, 285 people in the second class, 721 people in the third class, or the lower deck, and there was 885 crewmen, which give a total of the 2,228 people that were on board. The Titanic was declared before it ever left its dock that it was unsinkable. It is recorded in some American papers that some people said even God could not sink the Titanic. But while headed to the open sea on April 14, 1912, just before the midnight hour struck, something devastating happened to the Titanic. And within 3 hours after that, she had sunk 2 miles deep to the darkened body of the Atlantic Ocean. It was so tragic that night that next to Newfoundland, Canada, is where the Titanic took its final dive. It's amazing that a ship that took so long to build in less than 3 hours was destroyed and laying lifeless on the belly of the open seas. 1,523 people were lost at sea that day in that 28-degree chilling water in Canada. Out of the 1,523 people that died, to this day, only 330 bodies were ever found or identified. So even tonight, 98 years later, 1,193 people have made the Titanic their final resting place. There are no living survivors that were on the Titanic that day. The last living survivor died May 31st, 2009. Mrs. Milverna Dean was 9 weeks old when her parents had her on the Titanic. She boarded the life ship in the arms of her mother. Only 9 weeks old she was. And her mother took her to the lifeboat, and she died May 31st, 2009. So now all the voices of this worldwide shock have now been silenced forever. But if we could only visit that darkened, rusty ruins of that massive structure, I'm sure we could almost still hear the voices of those buried in their watery graves. Would you please allow me tonight to take your mind 2 miles deep into the open Atlantic Ocean, and let's witness together the blurred voices of those that have never had a chance to tell their story. The trip we're about to take is a one-time experience. We're about to see and hear things that's never been seen and heard before, only to the conclusion that it would save somebody's soul or change somebody's life. As we journey down through the chilly, darkened waters of the Atlantic Ocean, by the time we get to the belly of that ocean over 2 miles deep, it's black and darker than 1,000 midnights. The way has been lit up for us inside the Titanic. As it plunged to its watery grave, the Titanic split, and the bow of the ship was found 2,000 feet away from the stern, or the front part of the ship. It split in half as it laid on its belly. And as they viewed it for the first time on September 1st, 1985, 25 years ago when they first found it, it's almost like you could still hear an echo surrounding that rusty hull of that mammoth structure. Even God can't sink the Titanic. You better be careful, young man, what you say about God. because He's able to do exceedingly abundantly above anything that we are able to ask or even to think. As the stern is lit up, I can't believe my eyes. Looking through the blurry vision of the darkened waters, I see a young stately man there. His name is Robert C. Chisholm. I can't believe that his watery grave is here on the Titanic. He was the chief drawman of the lifeboats of the Titanic himself. He's the one that designed all the lifeboat structures that went around the side of the Titanic that salvaged all of those people. But there he is. He died within the hull of the Titanic himself, and I'd like to ask him, Mr. Chisholm, what went wrong? Why is the Titanic on the belly of the ocean? Why did it sink? Why did so many people, including yourself, have to die? He would mutter back through the ocean waters, because we allowed pleasure to make us blind to the need of security. Are you aware of the fact that the reason why so many people died in the Titanic is because they did not even have enough lifeboats on board? The very designer of the Titanic said this: I'm more interested in the first class passengers being comfortable, having fun, and having pleasure than I am their security if something happens. Because even God, remember, cannot sink the Titanic. And may I say to you that Titanic is a type of sin, according to the Scripture, in the fact that sin may look unsinkable when you're involved in it, but it's eventually going to take you down. And the Bible said that sin has pleasure to offer for a season, but when it's finished, it bringeth forth death. And the Bible said she sunk to the ground and many innocent souls died because, my friend, they were deceived by pleasure instead of security. I was reading an article today that said when the Titanic ran into that iceberg and it started to come down the right side of the stern, that the people on board had no idea what was happening. That as they were passing the iceberg, it was ripping the hull of that boat underneath sea level. They couldn't see it. The iceberg had tipped upside down. It was dark on top, and the majority of it was underneath the water, and it was ripping down the side of the Titanic. But the people thought they were just passing by. They just thought they got close to this iceberg, and the stern of the ship was pushing it out of the way. And here's what the article said. They said that some of the wealthy people that were in the first class section, they ran into their rooms and got ice picks, which was very prevalent back in that day. And Brother Rufus, they ran out on the edge of that ship and was leaning over the stern, and they were chipping away part of that iceberg. And they said they were going to try to preserve it and keep it and play with it as a souvenir. But what they didn't know, honey, was what they were playing with was about to kill them. And you see, that's how sin is. Sin looks awful pretty when you first get to fooling around with it, but it's dark, and the truth of the matter is it's turned upside down, and you really don't see what it's doing in your life. You really don't see what it's doing with your heart and with your mind. And you think, well, I'm going to play with this thing a little while. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to have pleasure with it. But what you don't understand, ladies and gentlemen, is the very thing you're playing with is the very thing that's going to kill you and take you under. Are you listening to me? There'll be many a drunk sit on a bar stool tonight and enjoy their liquor, wine, women, and song, but they'll never make it home. They'll die in a drunken stupor on the side of the road. Little did they know everything they were playing with tonight was going to kill them before the sun come up the next day. Many a dope addicts putting needles in their veins tonight will never live till the morning hour to tell the story on how grand the party is. Listen to me. That's why I hate sin. That's why I'm going to preach against it everywhere I go. That's why I'm going to name it. That's why I'm going to call it out. And I tell you, if it makes everybody mad, they'll just have to get mad. But I tell you, sin's a killer. It's taking advantage of you. It's manipulating you in ways you don't even know. It's robbing you of everything God ever wanted you to have. Don't be so deceived by pleasure that you don't understand there's a price to pay when you play with sin. Thank you, Mr. Chisholm. I appreciate that word of testimony. But wait a minute. What is that coming up the middle hallway? I can't believe my eyes. There's a young father, and he's holding the hand of his son. My God, that boy doesn't look 8 years old. Could somebody tell me what's going on here? Why is that little boy in a watery grave with his dad? I thought they had lifeboats for all the women and the children. And I studied the story of the unidentified child, they called him. They found the frozen corpse of a young boy floating face down in the Atlantic. He had no ID, he had no name, nobody knew where he come from, until later on they found out. Brother Henson, they was loading him on the ship with his mother. And he got word, Brother Manus, that all the men, no men were allowed on the boat. Women and children first. And he got on the boat with his mama, Brother Davenport, and he looked and he saw his daddy standing on the side of the ship, waving goodbye to him, his mama, and his sister. And he reached over and grabbed his mama and said, Mama, you got sis to be with you. Daddy ain't got nobody to be with him. And if my daddy's got to die, I don't want him to die alone. And when they started to lower the ship, he grabbed one of the ropes and climbed up and jumped back over the stern of that ship and jumped into the arms of his daddy and said, Daddy, if you got to die, I don't want you to die alone. And that unidentified boy died with his daddy. I say to you, it's a type of sin in the fact that it deceives you with its pleasure. Second of all, it's a type of sin in that it divides families and tears them all to pieces. I tell you, we need to stop acting like the devil's a distant cousin and sin is a virus and there's not much damage that happens to it and you're going to get over it after a while. I'll tell you something, friend. The devil's out to destroy your home and he's out to destroy mine. He loves nothing more than to see the mama go one way and the daddy go the other. He loves nothing more than to see little boys, Brother David, tore up in a situation where they don't know whether to go with dad or whether they need to go with mom. And I'm telling you, that's what sin does. It tears families up and ruins the unit that God instituted to be upon the face of this earth. I remember when I was filling in at a little country church in Mississippi, a little 12-year-old boy came and sat in the back row of our church, and I noticed right away when I got done preaching, that poor little fellow wasn't used to what he was in that day. And I was wild that morning, and I was jumping pews and throwing offering plates and cussing everybody. And I looked back there, and that old boy's eyes was that big, and they was going cross-eyed and around in circles. And handsome little old boy. And I went back there after service at the back door, and I was shaking hands, and he come to me, and he said, "I'll tell you something. You're crazy. And I like it here." And he said, "We're in the middle of moving, and when we get done moving, I want to come back. I want you to come see me." I said, "Son, have you ever been in a Baptist church before?" He said, "It's the first time. Never been in a Baptist church in my life. My friend here brought me." So Brother Riley, we got a visitor's card on him, and we sent him a letter and thanked him for coming. We made a phone call and thanked him for being there, and I went by to see him, and sure enough, they were packing boxes and putting them in the back of a pickup, and his mother come out. And Brother Ray, I met his mother, and she said, "Oh, that's all he talks about. You throw offering plates and cuss people and throw folks out." Said, "I've heard it every day." Said, "He can sound just like you." And I said, "Well, look, I want you to come to the service. You've got to bring that boy. He wants to come to church. You need to make memories of being in church with your son." Are you listening to me? I'm talking about sin dividing the family. She said, "Sir, we're in the middle of moving. As a matter of fact, we're moving closer to the church than we are right now." She said, "We'll get settled in next week, and I'll be there Sunday. You wait and see." Well, I went by to visit them on Saturday, sent them another letter, made another phone call. I went by to see them again. I said, "Y'all coming?" She said, "We got to go out of town. Some of the families come up." Long story. And she said, "But I promise you one thing. If we're alive, we'll be there the Sunday after." So I got up early that next Saturday morning, and I said to myself, I got to call that family. I've sent that boy 3 letters. I've made 3 phone calls. I've made 2 visits, but I want to make sure he's going to be here in the morning. So I picked up the phone early Saturday morning, and I called, and his mother answered the phone. And I said, "Ma'am, I hate to bother you this early. This is Brother Kidd." I said, "I'm calling to invite you to the church." And she broke down weeping. She said, "Oh, God, thank you for calling. I was looking for your number." I said, "I just wanted to know, are you and your son going to be at church in the morning? I want to know." And she said, "No, preacher. You haven't heard what happened last night." And I said, "No, ma'am, but I'm concerned and I want to help you. What can I do?" She said, "Preacher, I didn't want to tell you in front of him, but the reason why we were moving is my husband threw me out. He's messing with another woman. He promised me he would never drink a drop of liquor again. He used to be a drunk. Now he's back to drinking. He's beating me. He doesn't want me. He doesn't want my son. And she said, I didn't want to tell you in front of him, but his daddy threw us out and he doesn't want us anymore. And she said, I was in the middle of moving and we got here. She said, Brother Lee, we kind of got settled in the little old trailer they were living in and had a little old porch out the back. And she said, Brother Kid, last night, said, my son and I alone were sitting at the table eating. And I said, son, it's starting to get dusk dark. You need to get out there and feed that dog and take care of it. And she said, my son got the scraps off the table and I started the dishes. And she said, I realized too much time had went by. He should have been back in the house already. And she said, Brother Kid, I walked out the back porch and I flipped the light on. And my boy was hanging from a tree. He killed himself last night. She said, I froze. I was devastated. I didn't know what to do. I looked and there he was, hanging from a limb by his throat. His neck was broke. She said, finally, I realized what had happened, and I ran in the house, and I dialed 911, and I said, my son's dead, he hung himself. And she said it was just a matter of minutes they were there. And she said, I was regurgitating and falling over the table and on the verge of passing out. And said, well, one of the men went up into his bedroom there in that little room we had put aside out of the utility room at the end of the trailer, and there was a note. There was a note on the pillow, and it said, Dear Mom, you don't know what it's like to be with Dad one day and you the next. And to hear you two talk, it sounds like neither one of you really want me. It's always a fight of who's going to pick me up and who's going to drop me off. And Mama, you know what it's like not to know if your mom and dad want you, which weekend you're going where. So I thought I'd just make it easy on everybody. You won't have to worry about me anymore, Mom. He hung himself. Sat inside my church one time. The only Baptist preacher he ever heard in his life. And I've wondered many a night if I did my best and called him enough and sent enough letters and went by to see him enough. But I tell you, there's little boys and girls all over this country tonight. They're going to bed hungry and they don't have proper clothes and they don't have proper shoes. And many of them are going to bed without even a doll in the house. And they wonder if Mama even cares. They wonder if Daddy even loves them. You better believe I'm going to raise hell. You better believe I'm going to preach against sin. You better believe I'm going to call it by name. Sin destroys families. Somebody better start raising hell about it. Children destroyed. I was up in North Carolina preaching. The fireman came to me. I preached on hell the other night. And he come to me crying. Said, I wish you'd have been in town last week to see what I had to see. He said, we were called out at 3 o'clock in the morning. Our house was on fire. A little rundown section of town. Said we got there and the house was up in flames and the neighbors were standing there. And I said, look, who lives here and how many people live in the house? And they said, it's a single woman and her boy. I said, he's about 7. And said all the neighbors were out and the house was engulfed in flames. And they said, well, is anybody home? Is anybody? They said, don't know. They don't have a car. He said, we put on our oxygen tanks and all the suit. And he said, I'm going through this smoke-filled house. Flames are roaring everywhere. We have these horn things that we're trying to sound off and trying to respond to people. We're trying to listen through the roaring of the flames to see if there's somebody in there. And he said, I'm busting through one room after the other, just making sure nobody's in the house. And he said, I busted in a back room. And he said, I looked, and there lay that little 7-year-old boy curled up in the bed as if he was sleeping. And he said, I reached down there, and he said, I got to get him out of here. And he said, I reached down and picked him up, and then I realized, this kid's tied to the bed. He's tied to the bed. He said, I took a knife out of my unit, and he said, I cut the rope. Said he was tied like a dog. Then he said, I got that little boy up, and he said, I took my oxygen and put it on his mouth and said, breathe, boy, breathe. He said the smoke ventilation had devastated that little boy. And he said his body was limp. And he said, I on him as long as I could. Then I'd take a breath and put it back on him. Said I was bringing him through the smoke and fire, and wood was fire falling everywhere. And he said, I got him out on the street at 3:30 in the morning. I'm putting the oxygen on him, and I'm saying, breathe, son. You gotta breathe. You're only 7 years old. You can't die on me, son. You gotta breathe, boy. And all of a sudden I heard somebody go, no! He said, I turned around. Here come a woman so drunk she couldn't even stand up down the yellow line of the road. 2 drunks had her under each arm. The mother. Here she come down the road screaming no. And about the time she got to his little limp body, they pronounced him dead. Come to find out, she would go out and lay drunk all night. To keep him from running the streets, she tied him to the bed. That boy would lay in his own filth and his own waste, hungry and thirsty, tied to the bed like a dog. She staggered down the street drunk with 2 men yelling, no, no. And then somebody had the audacity to come hear me preach and say, I think he's a little bit stout. He says things a little bit rough. As long as drunk mamas are tying their babies to furniture, as long as drunk daddies are physically abusing their children and stomping their kids and not buying them groceries and clothes, those kids didn't ask to be brought into this world. They're your responsibility. And as long as you neglect it, I'm going to preach against it. I'm going to call it my name. I tell you, sin destroys the family. Number 3, I can't believe my eyes. Up in the crow's nest is the full crew. They're still standing there in their newly pressed uniforms. Excuse me, men, could you tell me why? Why did the Titanic sink? They bowed their heads in one accord and said, Preacher, we hate to admit it, but really, it's our fault that the Titanic sunk. You? 885 crewmen? It's your fault the boat sunk? Be honest with you, preacher, yes, it's our fault. Why is it your fault? Because you see, Captain John Smith knew that we were headed through an icy ocean. And the stern of that ship was made to break through ice. The tip of it, Brother Tim, was made to wedge through ice. But when we saw an issue and an obstacle in front of us, we begged the captain to turn to the left and not deal with the issue head on. And because we talked our leader into turning and not hitting the issue head on, it ripped the side of the boat wide open. And we all died. Had we left the captain alone, he was trained in that field. We're not even trained to be the guider of the ship. But we felt like if we all come together, we would override him and get him to turn. Don't hit it head on. You're going to cause damage. People are going to get upset. Folks are going to get mad. People aren't going to understand. Somebody may stumble and fall. You don't want to hurt nobody. Oh yeah, look up here at me. I'll throw a songbook at you. So what you do to avoid the issue is you turn to the left and the right. But little did he know, he did more damage avoiding the issue than he did had he hit it head on. You know what sin will try to do? It'll try to get a bunch of mossy back, pot-belly pig deacons to try to tell the preacher how to run the church. It'll get some laser-tongued Jezebel up in the captain's crow nest to try to tell him to turn away from issues. But I'm going to tell every preacher here, you better hear me well. Hit it head on. God made the church, it's fit. You hit the issues head on. Whether it's sin, whether it's rebellion, whether it's family, whether it's your neighbor, whether it's kinfolk, whether it's a deacon, whether it's a deacon's kid, whether it's a Sunday school teacher, whether it's the choir director. Bless God, if it's your own wife, plow it out. Don't turn to the left. Don't turn to the right. You'll have casualties. Plow her down the middle. Turn it up. Hit it wide open. And we'll give you the victory. Some of you looking pale now. You thought you was going to hear about a boat going under, right? I've been a sorry Christian in my life, but I've never been sorry enough to get mad at a man for telling me the truth. If you got the guts to preach it, I got the guts to live it. Yes, sir. And I tell you, Brother Lee, when the man of God's plowing it straight, you need to shout him on. You need to let him know that you appreciate the captain. Had John Smith done what he should have done, he'd have plowed through that iceberg, they'd have made it safely to the States, and everything would have been fine. Preacher, you can't listen to the crew. You can't let the church tell you what to do. Somebody's got to be in charge of this boat. God didn't put the preacher here to run the church. He put the preacher here to keep you from running the church. God gave you an under shepherd. God gave you a preacher man. Look up here, I'll throw a songbook at you, bless God Almighty. I'm telling you, God gave you a preacher, and He's looking out for you. And if He plows through something, it's for your benefit. It's to help you get farther down the road. Brother Rose, we can't turn to the left. We can't turn to the right. We got to keep her down the middle and keep plowing the road. Dodging issues. Number 4, I can see Jack Phillips. He was a young man. He was in charge of the Morse code that night on the Titanic. The reason why the Titanic went down, Jack, could you tell me? You were in charge of Morse code. Why wasn't you warned? Why didn't you tap in? You were having trouble. How come the boat went down when you were plugged in to resources that could have helped you? Jack would bow his head behind the Morse code and say, to be honest with you, preacher, it's my fault the ship went down. Do you mean it's your fault, Jack? You see, long before we hit the open waters, through Morse code, I was told that it was an icy ocean that night. But I ignored all the warnings because even God couldn't sink this ship. Morse code had come in to Jack Phillips on at least 4 different occasions, Brother Henson. Stop the ship. Stop the ship. Stop the ship. As a matter of fact, Brother Tim, the ship that sent him the warning had went to the ocean and turned around and come back and docked for the night. And Jack Phillips wrote him back, and I quote, "Shut up! Shut up! I'm busy and I'm tired." He disregarded the warnings that was put in his pathway that could have kept this tragedy from happening. And he radioed to the crew, "Full steam ahead! We can't sink, boys! Full steam ahead!" Once he rejected that last call, because it was in the midnight hours, the Morse code machines from the other ships were turned off. Later, when the ice opened up the stern of the Titanic and it began to sink, Jack Phillips realized what he had done, putting off the warnings and not heeding the call, and he got on his Morse code and began to send out messages of urgency. Nobody responded because he had already rejected the call and they turned off communications. And by the time the Morse code got to a ship, it was 4 hours away, the closest ship that responded. And when it got there, by morning, Brother Gale, the Titanic had already sunk and it was gone. And debris and human bodies had filled the ocean surface. I say to you, had he heeded the warnings, he could have saved the sinking of the ship. May I say to you, there's some of you, even in the course of this meeting, God has warned you to flee from the wrath of God to come. I'm not a good preacher, but I've tried to throw out the lifeline. I've tried to send you the message, buddy. I've tried to tell you that you're headed for disaster and ruin. You're headed for an untimely death that you're not even expecting. And I'll tell you what some of you have done. You've turned off our communications. Brother Rose, I'll tell you something. It's been a long time since I've been in a meeting like this. I've been in a lot of them like this, thank the Lord, but it's been a while. But Brother Henson, while I'm preaching tonight, there's young people and teenagers across this building hadn't heard a word I said. You used to. I've seen you under conviction. I've seen the Lord deal with you in days gone by. But you've turned off the communication. You're a rebel. You don't want anybody sending you Morse code. You're too busy. You're so arrogant now. You used to be humble. You used to bow your head. You used to be under conviction. Now you're saying, "Shut up! Shut up! I'm busy." Full steam ahead, boys! Even God can't take us down. And I'll tell you what you're going to do, honey. You're going to fill a premature grave. He that being often reproved, he that being offering Morse code and harden his neck, turns it off, shall suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy. It's on record and it's on tape, and I want everybody to hear me well. There's some of you in this meeting. This meeting was your last chance, honey, and you blowed it. You have blown it. You have said, shut up. You've turned a deaf ear. You're not interested in God. And the next time I see you, you'll be on a sinking ship headed for hell without God. No, you're not coming, honey. You can't. The machine's been turned off. Disregard the warnings. Number 5. The Titanic went down because some declined the opportunity to be saved. It dovetails together, and I'm through. Watch this. Floating 2 miles above us, ladies and gentlemen, are the lifeboats. We could see the forms of dead bodies floating, 330 of them floating on the 28-degree chilly water off the coast of Canada. All kinds of debris, whiskey bottles, champagne glasses, expensive high-heel shoes, radios. It's all floating above us, 2 miles above us. Look at the dead bodies, 330 of them, son. But you know what's sad? You see those lifeboats floating around waiting for help? They're half empty. Did you know the lifeboats were half empty? Many more people could have been saved, but they were so busy and involved in what they were doing, they didn't even realize that the lifeboat was passing their way. But what happened, Brother Riley, that's so sad is once the lifeboat passed, Brother Ray, and they saw that they were going under, they started screaming for the boats to come back one more time. Come back. You know what one of the chief crewmen said? We can't. Because if we go back to save them, when the Titanic sinks, the suction of that water as it plunges to its watery grave will pull these lifeboats down. Can you imagine, Brother Lee, being so wrapped up in activities that the lifeboat goes by you, half empty, plenty of seats, all kinds of room to get on, but you're so active and preoccupied with other things you don't even realize it. Then, later on, you realize you're in a mess. And you see the lifeboat out yonder. Its lights on. It's shooting up the flares. It's half empty. Help! Come back! If you'll pass by one more time, I'll get on! Please come back! The call comes through the dark. We can't! We can't! We passed by and you missed it. We're gone and we're not coming back. Oh, God, no. And I know that it was the last time the boat was ever going to pass by. I'd have got on board. Now I've missed it. And I want help. It's gone. You know what's going to happen to some of you? The boats passed by in this meeting. The meeting's over tonight. I'm done. The boat's going off into the distance now. A lot of new converts on the boat. There's a lot of folks shouting the victory, but there's plenty enough room for you to get on. But you missed it. Down the road now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to realize how screwed up you are and how dumb you were. You're going to realize how dumb you were, buddy. You're going to scream for the boat to come by one more time. And Song of Solomon chapter 5, verse number 5, the Holy Ghost is going to say, I'm not coming! And He's going to let you die in what you loved. Get on the boat. Get to Jesus while you can, son. Let's stand with our heads bowed. The hymns are coming to sing. Voices from within.